Katabasis by Kuang, probably the most anticipated release of the summer, if not the entire year, at least for the fantasy readers. And I would like to start this video by saying that I really, from the bottom of my heart, wanted to love this book, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So to start off with, this book was published on 26th of August 2025, both in US and UK, and I'm holding in my hands a UK Waterstone Special Edition. It's a beautiful edition, it's a beautiful book. It's just over 500 pages, I think 540 pages, and it's a fantasy standalone that tells the story of two Cambridge students going on a journey to hell to retrieve their professor. Now, Professor Grimes is not a very nice character. He's well known for being abusive in every shape or form. His students don't really like him as a personality, but unfortunately, he's best in the field. And throughout this book, Alice and Peter journey through hell to find Professor Grimes and take him back to Earth so he can help them progress academically. Now, as an idea and as a setting, hell is a very interesting place to be in, a very interesting place to journey through. And the idea that Kuang had was a really good one. Unfortunately, the execution just didn't deliver. But let's start with things that I liked and then move on to things that unfortunately I didn't like. Now, the main thing that I did enjoy, and that is something that I enjoy in every single one of her books, is her writing. I find them quite enjoyable to read. I find them quite easy to read. I really enjoyed Yellowface. That was an absolute blast for me. It's one of my favorite books. I wasn't a huge fan of Babel. I think my expectations were just a little bit higher than the reality, but the writing was still very good, and I found the book fairly entertaining, and I still sort of keep thinking about it and keep coming back to it in my conversations. Katabasis, I had very high expectations for because I thought that it would be somewhat similar to what Babel was in terms of the setting, in terms of the pace, in terms of the general idea of the book. And the writing is still the same, it's just unfortunately the execution somehow falls behind Babel. And the main similarity between the two is the setting. So Babel is set in Oxford, Katabasis is set in Cambridge, which was very interesting for me because I live in Cambridge. I have been here for almost 7 years now, and I would like to say that the book delivers 100%. Kuang has gone to both universities. She has gotten two masters, one in Cambridge, one in Oxford. And the way that she describes the city and the way that she describes the vibe of both cities, I think is absolutely on point. So, as far as the writing and as far as the university and the city itself, I think she has done an outstanding job. I really enjoyed both of those aspects. You can also definitely see how much research has gone into this book. The main magical system of the book is chalk and writing mathematical equations and drawing pentagrams on something, on surfaces. So the mathematical equations are explained in certain ways, and the certain concepts of math and concepts of logic are explained, but unfortunately, they're not always explained in a way that is accessible, or I would even say that in most cases, they're explained in a very non accessible way. So, more often than not, I was finding myself very interested in what she's talking about, but completely not understanding what she's saying, which is not a very nice position to be in when you're picking up a fiction book, a fantasy book. You sort of do want it to have a nice flow where you can just read throughout the story without having to open Google and ask Google to dumb it down for you. I also thought that the humor in the book was quite good. I was finding myself giggling and having the time of my life for the first about 50 to 100 pages. I genuinely thought it's going to be a very easy 5-star for me, and I thought I finally found my favorite book by Rebecca Kuang. But unfortunately, after about 100 pages, that completely disappears, and you're sort of just left following a lot more serious story than you would have thought so at the start. So those were my positives, and now looking back at it, I feel like I've managed to dampen every single one of them. But to summarize, I thought the writing was good. I thought Cambridge was shown in the way that I feel living in Cambridge. I thought the general vibe of the city was translated onto the page very well. I like the humor for the first 50 to 100 pages, and I thought that the general idea of the hell being the main like fantasy setting and the main area where all of the events are happening was a pretty good idea. Now, moving on to the things that unfortunately I didn't enjoy, and the main one would be the characters. And I've had a similar issue in Babel where there wasn't anything wrong with the main characters. I just didn't feel like I was rooting for them to the point where I actually cared what's going to happen with them. So I sort of ended up just reading the story for the sake of reading the story rather than genuinely feeling every emotion that they were feeling and rooting for them as they were going through that journey and hoping that everything turns out fine. And being really upset when things didn't go the way that they wanted to, or being very happy when things went exactly how they wanted. And as for the fantasy part of the story itself, even though I thought that hell was a really good idea, I really think that she didn't explore it to the extent that she could have and should have. So, at the start of the book, for I would say about the first 250 to 300 pages, hell is just a backdrop. So, you are just following a very non fantasy story of two students who struggle in academia and explain why they struggle in academia and why their professor is how he is, and why, even though he is not a very nice person, not a very nice professor, they rely on him to the extent that they do. And I thought that was a very interesting theme, but the fantasy element of it, hell and everything that they needed to do, the magic system, the characters that they were meeting in hell, the certain systems and concepts of hell, that was not explored for the first 250 pages to the extent that I wanted it to the extent that the fantasy would probably demand it to. So hell is just a nice background that they're traveling through. But that then drastically changes for about the last 200 pages, where we completely shift from the academia being the main subject and just focus on the journey through hell and what's happening and the end goal and how we reach the end goal. But unfortunately, by the time we got to that point, I felt like I wasn't rooting to the characters to the extent that I perhaps wanted to root for them. So when we just started focusing on their journey to the end, I just sort of didn't really care what happens to them. And with that, I think my main issue with the book was just the fact that somehow, in many ways, it just wasn't dramatic enough for me. I didn't feel like the stakes were explained to me to the extent that I wanted them to be explained, for me to properly root for these characters, for me to properly feel the pain that they're feeling. And I know that Kuang was trying to raise awareness to the issues that people encounter in academia when they choose that as their future and as their profession. I know that she's talking about the issues that either she encountered herself in her journey or the stories of the people that she knows. But unfortunately, I felt like they weren't explored to the level that I wanted them to, for me to really understand the struggle as somebody who's not as familiar with the field. So, as a result, I sort of felt like we had a very interesting setting that just wasn't explored to the extent that I wanted it to, and some very interesting subjects that just weren't explained to me in a way or to the extent that I wanted them explained for me to truly understand why these characters are struggling as much as they're struggling and why I need to feel for them. So, unfortunately, as much as I wanted to love Katabasis and as much as I was waiting for it to be released, and I actually had it pre ordered about a year ago as soon as it was announced and Waterstones had it for a pre order, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. I've landed on about a 3 star for me. I don't know if I would recommend it. If you're interested in reading about Cambridge, I think this would be a fun book. If you're interested in hell as a setting, I think this would be a fun book. I just wouldn't expect maybe too much from it. And I would be ready for a bit of a jump between fantasy and stories about academia and stories about the struggles. So I wouldn't go in expecting just a pure fantasy story. And with that said, I'm really looking forward to her next book. She has said that that is going to be a non-fantasy book, and based on what I've read, and so far it's Yellowface Babel and Katabasis, I personally prefer her non-fantasy books. I think she's quite a bit better at writing those, but that's just my personal opinion. You are more than welcome to disagree with it. And if you have read Katabasis, please leave a comment down below. I would love to chat. I would love to know what you thought about it. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.